Hello, friends, and welcome again. A day has passed since I've been able to do anything on telepathy and the Etheric Vehicle. We finished with Program 35, or actually I'm calling it, because of a naming issue, 35.1. But this is now Program 36. And we're beginning on page 90. And we're about halfway through the book. So, we might say that this series of programs, demanding as they are, will be about 70-something 70-something programs. Now, just a little segue here from number 35.1, and it's complicated. DK tells us that the third, fourth, and fifth initiations are related to the three stages of triadal communication. And then he goes further to bring out quite an interesting and abstruse correspondence, saying that these third, fourth, and fifth initiations are each of them, they are triadal, related to the seventh, eighth, and ninth initiations. Maybe the eighth and ninth initiations are rarely taken on our particular planet, but certainly the seventh is, and the Christ and the Buddha, over a lengthy process, are preparing for this seventh initiation, which will be administered not by Sanat Kumara, not by this unnamed being who administers the sixth, but by the planetary Logos himself. And then DK says, never does the geometrical pattern, the numerical progression, or the law of correspondences, all of them, there are three ways to look at it: geometry, numerical progression, or in general, the law of correspondences. Never does it break down in the understanding of the purpose and the plans of the planetary Logos, established before the worlds were created. Let me add, probably established in meditation, before the objectification of the worlds. So anyway, established before the worlds were created, and finding their prototypes. And may I add that we cannot fathom and which are not pictured for us, finding their prototypes upon the cosmic mental plane. We do know from our charts and diagrams how relatively bare the cosmic mental plane appears. Maybe there are one or two great centers there depicted, such as the causal body of a solar logos, and we can infer that the causal body of our planetary logos and of the sacred planetary logoi are also found there. Our particular causal body being upon the third subplane and of the cosmic mental plane, and those of the sacred planets, the causal bodies of the sacred planets, we can infer as being on the second subplane. I think he actually says, however, that we are a non-sacred planet on Earth, and our causal body or egoic lotus is found on the third subplane. Now, we don't doubt his next statement. These points are peculiarly difficult for men to grasp at this time, wherein their state of consciousness is concentratedly individualized. And may I add that this really tells us about our particular limitations, and that we are not, well, great cosmic thinkers, such as the higher initiates have to be. Now, if we went on to program number 36, from what we've just segued, we would find this from the Tibetan. Nevertheless, there is, on man's part, a steadily growing responsiveness to an expanding environment, and may I add, to a great extent, an environment very subtle, very subjective, and hidden from him, from man. So there is, says the Tibetan, a steadily growing responsiveness to an expanding environment, as, for instance, man's recognition of the distinction between nationalism and internationalism. Now, may I add, there is a battle going on right now. Internationalism is called globalism. And there are many people whose state of mind is firmly set against globalism. They seem to lose something if they were to assent to the value of globalism, just the way the individual, individualized person, focused within the personality, thinks he would lose something if he forgoes his almost strictly personality focus and begins to focus more broadly on other kingdoms, forms of life, groups, and so forth. There is the sense of loss when such expansion occurs. So we have to be aware that this is the tendency, and until man begins to grow up a little bit spiritually, it is the established tendency. And you wonder, may I add, how people can be so blind as to not be inclusive. But then for years and years, for millennia, the emphasis has been upon the personal self. And before there was really an established integrated personality, then the emphasis has been upon an aspect of that personality. Okay, going on with what DK tells us. So, following this little bit about man becoming aware of the distinction, however slowly this is happening, between nationalism and internationalism. Now, think of the Second World War and some of the songs and sort of mantrams that were brought forward. I'm thinking of Deutschland, über alles, Germany, over and above all. Well, that's an example of a fervid nationalism which seeks world dominance. And we have in America now, and we have had at various times over the last 100 years, something called America First. There's always that tendency to put one's own nature, one's own group in a primary position above all others. And gradually, that wears away. The great pandemic that we are now experiencing, which seems to outwit every effort to contain it, is meant, I think, to, among other things, to break down the barriers of selfishness and nationalism, and to demonstrate that humanity is one being. So let's see. DK goes on to say, there's a responsiveness to an expanding environment. This responsiveness, says DK, is naturally conditioned by human free will, effective peculiarly in the timing process. He may learn rapidly and fast, or he may go the slow way, but his state of consciousness remains one of a developing reaction to his environment as registered by his consciousness, and in which he, stage by stage, becomes an integral factor. So he is, among other things, learning to integrate with the soul and with higher points of tension. And his state of consciousness remains one of a developing reaction to his environment, in which he becomes more and more integrated. He becomes, stage by stage, an integral factor. And then this too should, I think, be emphasized. Well, according to the supreme science of contact and the subsidiary supportive sciences, which DK has listed above, the science of impression, the science of invocation and evocation, and in general, the science of telepathy. And there's more there as well. All support this great, is it the science of relations, which I've always thought deserves to be considered a major science. We are right now, may I suggest, poorly integrated into an ever-expanding system, but we are on our way. We don't really know where we belong, and we have not become important aspects in that system of expansive awareness. But growth is inevitable. And we will, after dealing with subtleties, we will begin to deal with true subjectivities. They are of a still more refined nature. We can say that the mental vehicle is subtle, the emotional is subtle, the etheric vehicle is subtle. But when we reach the soul, the triad, and the monad, we are into that which is not just subtle, but it is subjective and has to do with our truer identity, which is soul, triad, monad, and, if truth be known, even beyond. Now, DK talks a little bit here about integration. This integration into his environment, his absorption of its atmosphere, and his potency in progression are all related to the fact that he is created to receive impression, and that he possesses a mechanism of response to all the facets of the divine expression in manifestation. And we would ask, of course, how far that really goes. Man is a tiny emanation, and we have to see how far his sensitivity really carries. Well, he may be sensitive, but the irony is he may not know he is sensitive. He may be swept by his sensitivities without really knowing their source. And let's just say he is created to receive impression, and that he possesses a mechanism of response to all the facets of the divine expression in manifestation. This is, may I suggest, probably telling us that man's mechanism is far more sensitive than we can imagine. But then the word in manifestation may give the hint, because we're talking about that which actually works out on the physical plane, and maybe within the dense physical body of the planetary logos, which involves the mental plane, the astral plane, and the etheric physical plane. So, may I suggest that we have to learn to get as much out of, or extract as much as we can from our sensitive mechanism. Just a moment, please. So we might say that even in his lower mechanism, man is responsive to very high points of tension, and eventually will be consciously responsive to these, just the way high initiates and masters can be thought of as consciously responsive. Now, there is, the next statement is quite important, basically obviously, many of these selections have been brought to our attention through our work with the Arcane School, or in different ways. They have been advanced, and maybe one forgot where they came from. But there have been certain golden sections which carry information of a most valuable kind. Okay, so here's one of them. It is for this reason that the truly illumined man, who has taken the three highest initiations, and would that be 7, 8, 9, and all who have taken the three highest initiations are always referred to as the diamond-souled. They, in their totality, constitute the jewel in the lotus, the 12-petaled lotus, which is the symbol and expression of the potency of the planetary logos. Now, the jewel in the lotus may not be the jewel that we customarily talk about within our own individual system. It may be the jewel in the lotus of the causal body of our planet. And so again, a big cosmic kind of possibility is opened up before us. And it may be that. So the truly illumined man and all who have taken the three highest initiations are always referred to as the diamond-souled. Now, may I suggest that the causal body of the individual is destroyed at the third, or rather the fourth, initiation. And this will mean that that particular jewel in the lotus no longer exists with the destruction of that causal body. And so that's an interesting thought. So notice here, of course, the day will come when the causal body of the planetary logos also, at his fourth cosmic initiation, will be destroyed. But we have made a major shift from the individual case up to some higher correspondence within the causal body, or egoic lotus, of the planetary logos. And in the individual, when that happens, the content of the jewel in the lotus is abstracted into the spiritual triad. Now, when that would happen for a planetary logos, there has to be, of course, a correspondence much higher to the spiritual triad, and that which has created and is central to the jewel in the egoic lotus causal body of the planetary logos is abstracted into that higher correspondence within the planetary logoic construction, which we call, maybe we would call it, the true cosmic soul, or we would call it the spiritual triad, and of course of the planetary logos. And naturally, the planetary logos will have its own monad, though may I suggest that all monads are one. So basically, sometimes DK calls the word monad a meaningless term, but remember that it has the same kind of beginning lettering as the word monk, M-O-N. Monad and monk are closely related, and on we would go, ascending through the universe. And according to the Tibetan, may I suggest that he's saying the law of correspondences just does not break down. It will continue. Now, for us, a lot of these things are strictly academic. We have a kind of mental organization regarding what they are, and no possible experience yet regarding what they are. But increasingly, we will have that, and that which works out on our lowest and ordinary etheric physical level will be known to have come from very high sources, even if not directly from the areas of the 7th, 8th, and 9th initiations, which, well, Master DK, as far as we know, we don't know for certain now, but he has not apparently taken the 6th initiation of Chohanship. But when the his master, the Master Kutumi, well, at least it's one of his masters, because maybe the Christ is his real master, but when Master Kutumi becomes the Bodhisattva, and that would be during the age of Capricorn particularly, then maybe the Tibetan would be moved on into the capacity of Chohanship within that second ray ashram, even as Master K.H. Is now, because his elder brother, the Lord Maitreya, is now the Bodhisattva. Well, you might wonder, how can I be interested in such things? But, and when I say I mean you and I, but increasingly we become so, and more inclusive as we go. So they in their totality are considered the jewel in the lotus. And if you really think about it, this whole kind of structure is going to be found in galaxies, maybe in arms of galaxies, and then in galaxies and families of galaxies. It's going to be found all the way up, because even though we cannot relate to it directly, the law of correspondences will not break down. Okay. And interesting that he talks about the truly illumined man as one who has taken the three highest initiations. I would have been, I'll suggest, quite happy with the idea that the illumined man had taken initiations 3, 4, and 5, and maybe initiation 6, the ascension, and the higher ascension, initiation 7. That would give plenty of illumination, but he seems to be talking about the taking of the 7th, 8th, and 9th initiations. And what's lacking in my knowledge here is how many of these initiations can be actually taken in relation to the earth, and not necessarily, shall we say, in relation to a sacred planet. These sacred planets are bridges to various constellations. Eventually, we might say that a lot of training is probably going on Venus in relation to making a bridge to the system of Sirius. And maybe we can say the same of training going on Jupiter, making a bridge to the system of Orion, and especially to the star Betelgeuse, which is a giant red star and has much to do with a kind of a heart center, whereas the three kings, the belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Min Taka, have to do with still higher centers than the heart. If you stop to think about it, the heart is the middlemost center in the individual. We'll use the analogy there, and then we have to deal with the solar plexus, sacral, and base of the spine. And above the heart, we will have the throat and the ajna, and the what's going on in the head center. Well, all of these things will unfold. You can tell that in the case of the Tibetan, the knowledge is not superficial, and even though he says about the cosmic astral plane, what is to be found there And he says basically, I know not, I have not been there. Even though he says that, we can, I think, after all of this training, vouch for the putable accuracy of what he tells us. Okay, we've been led far and away and beyond the normal jewel in the lotus. And I do hope that when people call themselves diamond soul and struggle towards the revelation of the diamond, the revelation of the jewel, they are talking regarding the revelation of the jewel in the individual lotus, which seems quite an achievement in itself. I think we're not very close to that particular revelation, but as the synthesis petals unfold, and just before the fourth initiation, somewhere in Cosmic Fire, it talks about how these synthesis petals spring open, and what is to be found there is the full display of the individual jewel in the lotus. Now, the task here is not to become ambitious with relation to these unfoldments, but to take them as they come, wisely and with some restraint, and let the process, which is bent upon increasing the consciousness of the human being, run its course. Okay. There's a little more here, and I don't know, maybe I'll go on after that. We'll see. Yeah. Okay. So, I guess I could say it is the thoughts that come to you. Maybe thoughts not written down by the Tibetan, but which begin to dawn in your consciousness that may, signal to you that you are on the way to truer experience of the kinds of things which you can discuss academically. Academic discussion goes only too far, or so far. I've always been an academic type, it seems to me, and I've had a fair degree of mental knowledge about things which I have not experienced, but increasingly the experience begins to develop, and that is, for all of us, another stage. So DK goes on, and he says, "You can see, therefore, how the theme of revelation runs throughout the entire evolutionary process." Just make sure that, yeah. The theme of revelation runs throughout the entire evolutionary process. It must never be forgotten that step by step, stage by stage, expansion after expansion, initiation after initiation, the divine whole is realized by man. And we have to wonder whether this whole means the entire universe itself. Well, that would be a huge order, but let's just say that may I suggest that we realize there is a wholeness, and that we are on our way to, I would normally say, re-becoming in full consciousness that wholeness. But what I'll emphasize here is that the theme of revelation runs throughout the entire evolutionary process. And when you look at the collection of powers or cities found on the Buddhic and Atmic plane, even, divine vision is part of that revelation. It's connected with the fifth subplane from the top. Well, what else can you say? We just try to locate it. And realization, the same on the Atmic plane. I hope I said Buddhic to begin with regarding divine vision. If not, that's what I meant to say. Divine vision, 2 from the bottom, 5 from the top on the Buddhic plane, and realization, 2 from the bottom, 5 from the top on the Atmic plane. And finally, the divine whole, or at least that there is such a thing as the divine whole, is realized by man. These, may I suggest, are very different kinds of thoughts than the way billions of people think, whether in incarnation or out of incarnation. And DK repeats a number of the major premises so that we can really anchor what he says and realize finally that there is a practical expression of that part of the wholeness which we can divine, I've changed things around a little there, it can work out and must work out on our normal physical plane. And as I have suggested before, when you're looking at Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2, go to the fourth meditation, where it speaks of Shambhala and the hierarchy, and even the part in the divine plan carried forward by, well, as DK sometimes calls it, microscopic man. That's an interesting combination of words, isn't it? It puts us in the right frame of mind to realize, with an adjusted sense of right proportion, that is, with humility, where really we stand. Anyway, realization does come. And if we carry, may I suggest, what is said here, that step after step, stage by stage, expansion after expansion, initiation after initiation, if we carry that really forward, we are on our way to re-becoming the wholeness that we begin to realize. And everything would change for us. The way we relate in the great science of relations to apparent others. When we talk about others and otherness, otherness is really only apparent. It's not real, though it seems real in the Mahamaya of any particular universe. Now, DK goes on. The method is impressed from a hitherto unrecognized environment. What should we say? This method of going stage by stage, step by step, expansion after expansion, initiation after initiation. Is that the method? The method is impressed from a hitherto unrecognized environment, i.e., may I suggest, a very high environment which somehow manages to drive the human being forward. DK goes on, this only becomes possible in this particular form when the sons of mind, who are the sons of God and whose nature is at one with his, whose nature is at one with his, began to move on earth. Well, one kind of looks there for solar angelic involvement. I think suggesting, interpolating, we will become, right now, we are grateful to the Master, of course, but we will become as grateful to the solar Petri, the solar angel, extended as the angel of the presence, who is a member of the council within the sun. We will become as grateful to that great being as we are to the Master now. So we are surrounded by an unrecognized environment. Unrecognized. The hidden worlds, may I suggest, are very filled with all kinds of important distinctions of which we are presently totally unaware. And a lot of discrimination is going into our progress. We are taught how to distinguish one high vibration from another. He gives us a list of what has to be discriminated. Is it our soul? Is it the members of the ashram? Is it the master? Is it the monad? Is it the triad? I mean, there are just so many possible impressing vibrations. And how do we become sufficiently aware regarding just what it is that's doing the impressing? And who are these sons of mind? Who are the sons of God? And whose nature is at one with His? And they began to move on earth. It sounds to me like the coming of the solar angels, like those who have been trained on Sirius as a result of their advanced status in the previous solar system. So I think it becomes really important to keep the soul in mind. And if we do that too, we will find ourselves developing the mind as it is in Christ. Now, more on the science of impression. The science of impression is in reality the technique whereby humanity has been taught by the spiritual hierarchy from the moment of its first appearance upon earth, interpreting or interpolating here from the moment of man's first appearance on earth. So here we have something of significance, I would say. The science of impression, very important. The technique whereby humanity has been taught by the spiritual hierarchy from the moment of its first appearance on earth. Now, I'm also recalling that it may take a while before the angel, per se, takes a real interest in its reflection of the man. Maybe to be called the shadow of the monad, but the reflection of the angel. And other methods are used to bring humanity along. But there has always been, when man appeared, this spiritual hierarchy. I guess we can look at a time when the temple of Ibez existed in South America and is rapidly now, through technology, being rediscovered, or shall we say, its influence in architecture and civilization is being rediscovered. And there were also the god kings, as they have been called, and they attended to humanity, or tended to the development of humanity, and sometimes they incarnated themselves within these, what has been called, huge tabernacles of clay, because man at the time was a very big kind of entity. Madame Blavatsky joked, I think, but she referred to us as we pygmies, meaning we have shrunk tremendously in our stature compared with our earlier stature, our earlier size. But size may not be so important. If you've seen the Star Wars series, the Master Yoda was extremely capable, and he was, in his appearance, diminutive. So there's something about his presence in that fanciful, though maybe truth-bearing series that tells the story of stature. I've been advised by my friend Philip Lindsay that the Bahamian Buddhas destroyed. Were they destroyed in Afghanistan? One of those Middle Eastern countries actually were an historical record in stone of the stature of some of the great entities that were human in earlier days. But it is not the sign of an advanced religion not to be able to tolerate the presence of other points of view and being possessed by the desire to wipe out those points of view because they are threatening to the inadequacies of one's own. So let's just assume we have always, as a human race, whether individualizing here on Earth or transported in during the Atlantean period, we have always been supervised and taught by the spiritual hierarchy, whoever may have been the head of that hierarchy. Let's remember that it cannot have been the Christ or the Buddha, because they were taking the fourth initiation. Is that correct? No, the third initiation in a fourth ray ashram in Atlantean times. So, more on this science of impression. It is the technique which all disciples have to learn, no matter which of the 7 ray paths they may eventually choose. I guess this would mean choosing at the 5th or 6th initiation. And it is also the sublime art. That's an interesting term, which every master practices on inspiration from Shambhala. Sometimes it is the supreme science of contact which seems paramount, but sometimes from a more practical perspective, the science of impression is the one that is emphasized. I fully realize that in discussing these things, we are beginners in many respects, and have not been consciously affected by the science of impression, as we will be in the future. DK goes on. I love this sublime art. Which every master practices on inspiration from Shambhala. Well, how do you get good at something? Well, you practice it, and there is a city called Perfection. I think it's found on the 4th sublevel of the atmic plane, and we have that old mantra that practice makes perfect. So more about it. It is a technique which is implemented by the will, and its consummation is the complete assimilation of the little wills of men into the divine purpose. It is the acceptance on their part of the promotion of that purpose through right impression on all forms of life at any particular point in evolution. Disciples then become agents of the divine will and are entrusted with the plans and the secrets and the inspiration which are hidden within the mind of God. It is implemented by the will and reaches its consummation in the complete assimilation of the little wills of men into the divine purpose. Well, our great invocation, number 3, helps there from the point of light within a point of will. Let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. Right now, shall we say, may I suggest, that so many people in the world are unwilling. Now the Christ fought a great battle in the Garden of Gethsemane to become willing to acquiesce to the greater will of the Father. So from the center, where the will of God is known, let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters know and serve. And the question would come to us, how willing are we to serve this will from the center where the will of God is known? Or are we still in that rebellious stage where the personality rebels against the guiding powers? It's not an easy choice. The Christ found it difficult, but he was the recipient of an angel from Capricorn who arrived to strengthen him and to comfort him. And at last, even for all of his attainment, and the idea that he had been the head of the hierarchy for a long time, even that did not ameliorate the painful nature of acquiescing to the will of the Father. I have to notice that the science of contact is called supreme, and the science of impression is called sublime. And of course, since the Tibetan does not misuse words, he's very careful, I would say most of the time, except when you know he's just speaking in general. When he uses the word art, he probably distinguishes that from science per se. In the art, there is intuitive application. Isn't it interesting to note, though, that the masters continue practicing, in this case, on inspiration from Shambhala. We are far yet from the complete assimilation of the little wills of men into the divine purpose. Maybe divine intelligence comes first under the primordial ray, and divine love wisdom under the divine ray, and then finally the assimilation of all the little wills of men into the divine purpose. Right now, in the field of politics and international relations, the whole question of what purpose is being followed is a very front and center. There are some who are so selfish they cannot possibly follow the divine purpose. I'm thinking that, we have to get these generalities reasonably organized in our minds, and then all the particulars will begin to fall into place. Now, we have reached a possible stopping point. The next section takes us to a truly next section, section 3, rather 13, and looks at telepathic sensitivity as a normal unfoldment. I guess I feel inclined at this moment to go ahead a little bit, following this statement. His contribution to the divine plan. Well, we can't yet tell who the his is, to whom it belongs, because it's the first word in a sentence, and so is normally capitalized. So if we decided to go on for a bit, because we're almost at page 92, this little section is called his contribution to the divine plan. And we've been talking about energies and a plan with the secrets of and the inspiration which are hidden in the mind of God. They're even hidden from the masters. Now, how much of the true name of Sanat Kumara, or even the planetary logos, does a master know? And not many letters or syllables in that true name of Sanat Kumara, let alone the planetary logos. So there are many factors hidden from the relatively tininess of the master. Maybe we remember that the masters are sometimes amused at how high their chelas rate them beyond truly their capacity. But as I say, the sense of proportion, that adjusted sense of right proportion, is rare to find. And with it comes humility, because that is the definition of humility, an adjusted sense of right proportion. It's not the same as eating humble pie, so to speak, or pretending one is low in life. It's not putting oneself down. That would be a violation of humility, because the right proportion would have been sacrificed. So there are knowledges hidden in the mind of God. And DK goes on to say, to that knowledge, germinated and formed in the solar system previous to this, which, may I suggest, was a major solar system developing the factor of intelligence. So the knowledge germinated and formed in the solar system previous to this. They add that which the present solar system has to give and to mature. Well, the hint there is that the love-wisdom energy is not yet mature in this solar system, but is becoming so. So this whole thing, I think, can be elevated. The being known as our planetary logos, though tiny and also a mortal, as one of the Pleiades maybe found out the hard way, marrying a mortal, is still vast in its depth of understanding compared to what that tiny emanation that we call man presently seems to be. So let's keep in mind that we are maturing love wisdom. And when the Buddha and the Christ made their cosmic contacts, each of them at their own respective, sixth initiation, I would say, that love-wisdom energy really moved forward, with wisdom coming through the Buddha and love through the Christ. Well, we want to be among those, don't we, who help with this maturing. There's not so much we have to do regarding the primordial ray. It is within the context of our planet and solar system matured. But there is a great deal to be done to continue the maturation process of the love wisdom energy. Now, DK goes on. The magnetic attractiveness of the second ray of love wisdom in one of its three major forms or rays of aspect implemented by the four rays of attribute. Well, this is our labor. This is our labor, and I think I will put this in the love wisdom color. So there's a 3 and 4 division in the love wisdom energy. And of course, what love and wisdom really are profoundly mysterious and have been revealed to us by those potent exemplars of human attainment, namely the Christ and the Buddha. Okay. Now, this power, says the Tibetan, to use the ray energies to attract and impress the constantly expanding revelation, is the clue to all the work going forward today, and to this activity we give the name, the science of impression. Another one of those short but golden definitions of the science of impression. This power, says the Tibetan, to use the ray energies to attract and impress the constantly expanding revelation of, may I suggest, the hidden, undetected factors in the mind, nature of the planetary logos and beyond. This power, says the Tibetan, is the clue to all the work going forward today, and to this activity we give the name the science of impression. It's definitely, this definition is coming in from a different angle. You can see that the book is filled with, maybe, can I call them ponderables? Statements where you have to stop and really ponder upon them. How is it, we might ask, that all these ray energies attract and impress the revelation? How did that happen? Well, we know that in Shambhala all the ray lords are represented, and the Buddhas of activity and esoteric Kumaras have their ray configurations. We understand that the rays are represented within the council chamber in various ways. So many things are hidden in the mind of God, our planetary logos, and we need the representation of these seven rays to draw them forth, these hidden factors, into objectivity, into a condition of being understood. So here is yet another example of why it is so important to study the seven rays. We're not just talking about individual psychology. We're talking about something much bigger. We're talking about a process which is occurring on planetary logoic levels and is depending upon the presence of the seven rays in order to be more completely understood. It's reminding me of that kind of statement that the planes are moving from east to west, whereas the rays are moving from north to south, I think, and together they create some kind of serpentine design, and which itself is revelatory. Now, the science of impression. To this activity, to use the ray energies to attract and impress the constantly expanding revelation, because the revelation involves really all the rays, representing very great sources. We give the name the science of impression. Actually, it probably would be wise to make a compilation on the science of impression, to gather the golden paragraphs and see the different angles from which Master DK attempts to explain this science. We can't really have the full revelation without the presence of all the seven rays. Something would be missing, right? Okay. So, yet another description of the science of impression. There have been so many of them, I seem to have managed to forget what they all are, but if we could get them together topically under the eye, we would see how necessary are the presence of the rays to expand the revelation. Science of impression. DK goes on and says, it involves the constant opening up to a new environment, an environment which reaches all the way from the lowest grade of daily living, undertaken by the least developed of human beings, may I interpolate, those who have just opened the first petal or are very close to doing that, the first individual petal of the egoic lotus. So all the way from the lowest grade of daily living, undertaken by the least developed of human beings, well, we're looking at the constant opening up of a new environment. And DK goes on, to that point, upon the ladder of evolution, where the aspirant becomes consciously susceptible to what we call spiritual impression. Well, okay, how high is that? I think he'll tell us how high he means. He's not talking beyond the range of practicality for the human being. It looks like simply now, before we read further, what would you say? Is this impression to be gathered from the soul, from the members of the ashram, from the true soul or triad, from the monad, from whence this conscious susceptibility to spiritual impression. Okay, now what further? All the way from ordinary, crude living in the fifth or first petal of the egoic lotus to a much higher type of sensitivity, probably beginning within the second circle of petals, which, when some of them are open, 5 and 6, signal that initiation has been taken. The first initiation, in the case of petal number 5, and the second initiation in the case of petal number 6. So, at that point, says the Tibetan, he becomes capable of being more sensitive to a higher range of impression, and at the same time, he himself begins to learn the art of impressing the minds of others to master the understanding of the level from which he works as an impressing agent, and to know who are the sons of men that he can impress. So it seems that after there is an impression from the soul, let us say, then still higher forms of impression can come about. He becomes more sensitive to a higher range of impression. And then when that occurs, and I don't know if you feel it happening in your life, but have you become anything of an impressing agent? And who is it, after all, that you can impress? It may be that you are simply, let's say, a mentor in one of the esoteric schools of the times, the Arcane School, the School for Esoteric Studies, the Moria Federation, and you write letters to your students based upon your own level of understanding. And those letters carry a certain power of impression, which helps to elevate those students who receive it. It can be as simple as that. So, the idea that we should know who it is we really can impress if we work even modestly as an impressing agent is very important. I mean, none of us is out there trying to impress a high initiate or a master. That would be the putting the cart before the horse, you know. And that would not be appropriate. So as we do a little bit of impressing, understanding how this is done, growing into the task, we have to know who are the likely recipients of the kind of impression we can offer. So, yes, he has to begin to learn the art of impressing the mind of others, the art of it. He didn't just say science. And to master the understanding of the level from which he works as an impressing agent, and to know who are the sons of men he can impress. And that would require much discrimination. May I suggest we've often witnessed that a person with lesser capabilities tries to impress someone with greater capabilities, and it does not work, of course. Now, another lesson here that has to be mastered, the Tibetan goes on and says, he has to master also the secondary lesson of adapting his environment in such a manner that he can impress others, and the impression can find its way through his environing circumstances into the usually inattentive minds for whom he feels a responsibility. Well, there is so much clutter, we might say, standing in the way of the impressing agent, even down on our level. The impression must find its way through the environing circumstances. There was one of the students, it's hard to remember his initials. Was it DLR? I think his name was Charles Hill. He was the victim of the glamour of circumstance. So many petty little things were apparently in his way, and he was bound by them. Now, how, I can ask, shall we actually get across the impressing message when people are so entirely wrapped up in their circumstances? Circum means around, that which stands around them. I think it would require a lot of skill in action to know what to say and how to say it and when to say it, or to write it or to think it, but mostly on the human level. We have to bring these things into some sort of verbal form for people to understand. Try to think for a moment. Are you in any way impressed by another human being, let's say, who is not a master, but simply an associate of some kind on the physical plane, and what does that individual say? How does he say it, and when does he say it that makes an impression upon you? I've been reviewing a lot of my life circumstances. It almost seems an inevitable thing to do, and I'm noticing those moments when I was really impressed by something someone said, not necessarily for the good, but it made an impression upon me. It cut through many things that were maybe preoccupying me at the moment. Things come up like that, and you wonder, why they come up at that particular moment, but obviously what was said fought its way through my usual preoccupations at the moment. And maybe, in your life, you will have recollection of such moments of impression. So, adapting his environment. This is another one of those lessons that is required. Understanding from where he works and adapting one's own environment so an impressing agent can be effective with the intended impression, regardless of the, what can I call it, the clutter of circumstance. Finding the way through, because that's not easy. There are often so many resistances in someone that, even down here at the human level, that we would seek to impress. Just habitual responses which fight against the impression being made. And you can generally tell when an impression finally makes its way through all the customary reactions. Okay. And I want to build that word art up just a little bit. How much skill in action it really requires. How much careful listening to know where the other individual stands and what are the likely reactions and the likely illusions that will be thrown up to block the way of even a well-intended impression. I'm sure that, or feel sure, that as the Tibetan tried to get across to his gathered students, even though via Alice Bailey, who pretty much gave those students the Tibetan's thoughts, that there were resistances. I'm remembering a certain seventh ray soul, I think, and the artist she was, a first ray personality, I think, and a fourth ray mind, and DK, she had said she had succumbed to the glamour of an independent soul. Well, that's pretty much the glamour of an independent personality that doesn't want to be told what to do. Resistances exist in every person when you try to expand their point of view, deepen their point of view. I don't think any of us is devoid of those resistances, and they do consume time. And oftentimes they're quite unconscious to the person who is almost involuntarily throwing up the resistance. There's just something about their structure that demands that they retain a certain way of reaction. It's within their comfort zone to do so, and it doesn't threaten the structure of their thought. Well, all of that has to be worked through, obviously. And that will take time. That will take time. So, he is secondarily adapting his environment in such a manner so that he can impress others. But what a degree of sensitivity it takes. If your habitual reactions just collide with the habitual reactions of another, it's just going to be the same thing over and over again. No real gain will be achieved because you will have lost your finesse in learning the way through those resistances. Your own resistances will just aggravate the situation. But anyway, this work, knowing who you can impress and working your way through the environmental circumstances, these are two important factors. So the impression can find its way through environing circumstances. I wonder how successful we are at that, or whether we just get into an argument, our resistances and theirs, lots of heat and not too much light. The Tibetan goes on to say that if he can make his way through, this he does through a growing knowledge of himself and through learning the art of registering. Okay. The clearer and the more deeply apprehending is his capacity to register the impression to which he is subjected and to which he is sensitive, the more easily will he reach those he must aid towards a wider and deeper insight. So, what's required here? A growing knowledge of himself and learning the art of registering. Well, basically, this is saying that the better we register those higher points of tension which are attempting to impress us, the more successful we will be on our own much lesser level in impressing others. Okay, well, that makes sense. Who gets through to us? Who really gets through to us without awakening our resistances? And why is it that they get through? Do they have some particular skill in action that helps them through? Is there some reason why we drop our almost instinctual barriers against hearing what such people have to say? Why do we drop our resistances? And if I may suggest, it's oftentimes accompanied by an attitude in the impressing agent of not forcing the impression upon us or upon another. When we think we are being dictated to and our freedom is disappearing, then up come the usual forms of safety producing resistances. At least they seem to produce safety through sustained confinement at a lesser point of tension. So the question is, a simple question in a way, when are we really open to listen to another who maybe has something of value to impart to us? I have experience with this whole process. And even though, let's say, my intention was to impart something of value from the teaching, let's say, I am told I don't want to hear you, I don't want to be taught by you, I don't want to think about those things, just a safety response through a collapse of possibility. Okay, a little more here. This registering of his own expanding environment, with all its implications of a new vision, a new goal, a wider field of service, leads to the following inflowing energies arriving on the wings of inspiration, becoming a reservoir of thought substance, to the use of which he must accustom himself. Well, so much of our true environment is hidden away. We're just not aware of what it is, where it is. We may be aware of the more outer forms, the more personal forms. The more circumstantial forms of our environment. But a new vision, a new goal, a wider field of service, all of this brings in inspiration and new inflowing energies. And becoming a reservoir of thought substance, which to which he must accustom himself. So we basically, if I can suggest, we reach higher for inspiration, and our expanding environment is oftentimes above us in point of tension. Is not the Tibetan contributing to our inspiration? Is he not above us? Is he not offering somehow an expanding environment? And are not new visions, new goals, and wider fields of service coming to our minds as we are instructed by the Tibetan? So, inspired. When's the last time you or I have been truly inspired? And what are those avenues of inspiration? Maybe according to ray types, they are gained in different ways. I know I find certain music always inspiring and uplifting. I seem to remember Carnegie Hall in Chicago when I was quite a young person. I don't know, 4 or 5, 6 years old, and hearing Beethoven's Fifth Symphony for the first time. I was really ecstatic. Inspiration came through that particular modality. For other people, on other rays, it might be quite different. Okay, now going on a bit, So DK is telling us basically how to do this, how to register our own expanding environment, maybe how to get through to others for whom what we say offers an expanding environment. Yeah. And you can understand what kind of almost delicacy is needed to accomplish these various expansions and deepenings of consciousness. There's so much more to all this than a superficial reading will initially give. Yet we oftentimes remain satisfied with that reading, and it's just not adequate. Not adequate. After 50 years with these books, I'm realizing the inadequacy of the once over lightly approach to what the Tibetan says or writes. Maybe it's taken me a long time, I think, to realize the depth of what is being communicated. So there's a little more here. The first step then, says the Tibetan, is the fact of recording and of reducing into correct and available concepts, ideas and thought forms that that which he has registered. So that's the beginning. Well, the whole thing is needing to be blown up a bit. It's funny how the eye looks for something a little bigger and tends to think that it's important because of its relative size. So recording is one thing, but there can remain a kind of a mystical vagueness to the recording unless the mind nature, the abstract mind, and to an extent, yes, the concrete mind are drawn forth and are reducing the recording, the registering, we can call it, into correct and available concepts, ideas, and thought forms. That which has been registered. If we just leave these as vague impressions, they will fail to carry out their more practical, potentially more practical mission. So this is the beginning. Now, DK goes on to say, this marks the first stage in his truly occult service, and to this new type of service he will be increasingly dedicated. When we worked in the arcane school, one got the impression as we continued our studies that we were dealing exactly with a growing type of occult service. If we cannot formulate in concepts, ideas, and thought forms which make sense to others, then there is almost, you might say, a waste of the impression. The first stage. And he's calling us to this stage. Now, I wonder, when we think of our service, the third law of the soul and the different ways we can serve, if we think of this method of taking a formerly vague impression, high but vague, and reducing it to usability by ourselves and others. And that's why, may I suggest, such an exquisite choice of words is needed in the process. Now, you can tell that with Alice Bailey, DK worked out something very very revelatory in the method of writing and speech. The English is not only very good, but it carries much more than we might normally suspect. It carries implication, and Alice Bailey, we know, was swept by such implication, by the vistas which appeared to her as DK was offering various subjects. It must have been, it was a hard life for her, but at the same time, it was such an illuminating life one can gather from the way they worked. Now, a little further, with the Tibetan, from the reservoir of thought substance, he learns to project those forms, those magnetic ideas, which will invoke the attention of those he seeks to help. This is called the stage of resultant invocation. He sends them forth. Forms, magnetic ideas. Now this is, I would say, may I suggest exactly what the Tibetan is doing. He is impressed from on high, no doubt, and he projects. He has developed the method of concretizing or rendering into forms, magnetic ideas, etc., what is impressed upon him, and it has its own name too. Okay. Now let's see. There might be a little more that I want to say as part of this. It is an invocative act. So he's calling below, probably. He's calling upon those he wants to help. He's invoking the attention of those he wants to help. Okay. Have we felt invoked in this manner? Well, in a way, when the Tibetan sent forth his books, it was an invocation. And we did respond with an evocation. We gathered around him and tried to take advantage of that to which we were responding. And he was counting on this, I'm sure. He knew, I believe, that there would be those in the world, other than those at first deliberately invited, because there were some of those that Alice Bailey didn't know really in person, but he knew that there would be those who were attracted to what he was saying, and that he could use them as a vehicle for the propagation, for the development of his thought, for the distribution of his thought. And that was definitely in process through the various seed groups that were being formed and through later groups, the ashramic group, and another group that was gathered around the instructions in Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 2. He had an instrument through which to work. Now, may I suggest that every impressing agent needs an instrument through which to work. So anyway, invoking the attention of those he seeks to help is called the stage of resultant invocation. It is an invocative act, an invocative way of living, which will find its way into the minds of men and will call forth or evoke from them a response and a widening consciousness. The processes of spiritual impression are therefore set up. So this tells us of a way of living in the future, an invocative act and an invocative way of living, finding its way into the minds of men and will elicit an evocative response, a response which is an evocation. And the response will be a widening consciousness. And thus the processes are set up for spiritual impression. Okay, we just have a tiny bit more to work with now. And the last thing the Tibetan says before the new section, it is also an invocation on the part of the disciple for further impression and inspiration in order to increase his ability to serve. Because when there is a response, it's like saying, give me more of this. So it is also an invocation for further impression, further and greater impression and inspiration to increase his ability to serve. So, when we respond evocatively, we're basically opening the door and we're saying we are open to further invocation, and to that there will also be an invocative response, and thus some kind of loop is set up between our impressing agent and our response to the invoking agent. Our response is the evocation. So basically, we call and an answer comes. If we invoke in the right way, a useful answer comes. And so therefore, let me suggest that we have to be attentive. Are we somehow being invoked? Well, just the reading of the books is a tremendous invocation. We are reached by the books. And how do we respond? By being open still to more of that invocation. And as I said, that loop is set up, which elevates our capacities and generates in us the ability on quite a bit lower level to work with those we seek to help. You can understand that a good relationship, for instance, can be set up between a mentor and the mentor's student, and a kind of back and forth dialogue can ensue. And it will be helping the impressing agent to have an instrument, and helping the the instrument to be elevated in its quality and ability to serve. Okay, friends, well, we're somewhere here, and basically the next thing to come up will be program 37, and it will have to do with section 13, telepathic sensitivity, a normal unfoldment. I might say that it's the strangeness of the notion of telepathy which somehow curtails the ability to utilize telepathy. We don't have faith that it exists already within us. So DK will no doubt explain that. We're on page 94, and it went as far as 94 in this program. 36, it's no longer, it's a mixture of I'm sorry, the 29th and the 30th of November. So what I'll do is I'll take this down right before we would be starting program 37. And this would be the end of video commentary 36, and our date would be 30th of November. And we started at page 90, and we went to 94. And the next one will have our usual XX, as I don't know, on Mondays and Tuesdays, unless something goes awry, I seem to be in a position to do a bit more, but maybe not. So I'm going to copy this much This much at least. And make of it a kind of a short program that I will call by some name or other. Let's see. And this will be the telepathy section. That's the one I want. And it will be a small program. But then if I want to look at this in the larger sense, I will do it this way. Okay? And this will be complete. And it'll be number 36. So let's see how that looks.